So good afternoon, welcome to the TDAG seminar. TDAG is the Trees and Design Action Group. It is a network and forum that brings together people and organisations to support the role of urban trees through better collaboration, knowledge exchange in the planning, design, construction, management and maintenance of our trees. Evidence-based information is really important to us, and that's why we hold these seminars to share with you what we know, but more importantly, so that we know what you know. We would like to thank our partners for who have co-organised the workshop with us today. That's the Arbor Association, the Landscape Institute, the TCPA and the Urban Design Group. So I would like to hand over to our chair now for the day. Our chair is Esme Jones, the Engagement and Marketing Director at Trees for Cities. And in her role, Esme is responsible for leading engagement and marketing at Trees for Cities. And her team works to inspire, engage and involve volunteers, communities and individual supporters, galvanizing them to take action by planting, protecting and promoting urban trees and green spaces. Over to you, Esme.
Thanks so much, Emma, and lovely to see everyone today. It's great to be here, and thank you very much for having me to chair. I'm going to do my best to keep on time, field your questions as best I can. And before we jump into that, I'll tell you a bit about what we do at Trees for Cities and why community engagement is so important. So, as Emma mentioned, what we do at Trees for Cities is we plant, protect, and promote trees in urban places, and we really focus on areas with low tree equity. And the sort of lifeblood of our charity, the thread that runs through everything we do is centered around the fact that people and trees are inextricably linked. We can't do what we do without people, basically. And so they've got to focus in any of our plans, when we plant, when we strive to protect trees and keep them growing and established and thriving. And we do some very, very deep engagement work with communities in the places that we plant. And we often plant in places where people don't necessarily want trees to begin with, and it feels like a really, really tough thing to do. So we do all sorts of things to engage communities, whether that's door knocking, setting up workshops with people who are very active and influential in those areas. We drop leaflets, we chat to people on the street, we put posters up around parks and green spaces. And we try and get really deep into the community to understand what they need and want from us. We very rarely stop a planting project, but we do change our projects when they need to be changed, having listened to communities and listened to their feedback. And what's lovely about the way we plant when we do plant is that we organise community planting days so that the community can come and get stuck in and actually dig and water and put that mulch onto the trees once they're planted. And those opportunities give us a really, really good moment to talk to communities about other problems that they're facing and how trees might be able to help them. I want to share a little piece of information that is really stuck with me after running a workshop with about 50 or 60 people in Birmingham a few weeks ago. The session was with urban forestry community groups and a few professionals from the sector. And the big message that came out of that sort of workshop and that seminar was that to get under the skin of communities, you've got to meet them where they are. You've got to think about the other things that they're worried about, because the likelihood is that trees are probably not the number one thing they're worried about. They're probably worried about getting their kids to school, or whether their wheelchair actually can move along a pavement, or their health and their well-being, or their money, anything like that. And so one of the big things that has been sitting with me recently is that we've got to think about what communities need from us on different societal levels, and talking to them about what's worrying them, and then talking about trees and nature. It's a really good way to kind of get in with them. And it really helps create buy-in. When you plant the trees, it stops them being vandalized or mowed over or pulled up, or even worse. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, and that's Phil. Hi, Phil. Phil is joining us today from My York Central and is an architect as well. So Phil, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Let me share screen if I can find out how to do that. So that should be. Has that now all appeared as it should do? Great, if that's okay. Right, then what I'd like to do is talk you through a project in York which examines how you go way beyond public consultation to actually create a vision for a part of a city and then work to implement that. The scene of the story is the York Central site in York. It's about 40 odd hectares of brownfield site behind York Station. It has this massive backstory of about 30 or 40 years of failed attempts to try and turn it from former railway land into something more useful, which eventually concluded with a partnership of landholders being formed about 7 or 8 years back, which unlocked the site and allowed it to start moving forward. York has this long tradition of public consultation. It's hard to do anything in York without being asked to have your say on it. And this has generally in the past taken this kind of fairly standard format of glossy questionnaires which ask closed questions. And in the case of York Central, that was very much the way it went. Alongside that, there was the establishment of what was deemed a representative body, York Central Community Forum, which was an invite-only body that was set up to engage with people who were seen as being representative of the local community. This process did not go well. It ended up at a point in 2018 where there was public anger about this, and public anger particularly from those people who had been excluded from that engagement process. So at that time, my colleague Helen Graham and I had just finished a massive public engagement process called My Castle Gateway, looking at the Castle and Eye of York area in a much deeper and broader way. And we'd established a kind of 3-stage process, which stepped through building an open brief, through exploring the complex issues early rather than kicking them down the line for the designers, and about making change together to ensure that people engage with the process of making change rather than simply being asked what they wanted and then being told to walk away. So we set up what we call the Festival of York Central, which was 40 odd events co-created with a variety of local people and organisations across 4 themed weeks. That first stage then, so building an open brief, and we set out here what we mean by that. It's a bridge between where we are now and where we want to be, and it allows local people to actually set the agenda for that and to set out what matters to them and what they want to be able to do. And in the case of York Central, that involved an awful lot of walking and talking. We did walks, organised walks, cycle rides, all sorts of workshops and events, film screenings, all manner of stuff like that. We worked very much with local knowledge and enthusiasm. There's often a sniffiness within public consultation around the usual suspects, as they're dubbed. But the usual suspects can often bring an awful lot of enthusiasm and engagement and commitment to the project if you are able to expose their ideas then to proper public debate. We recorded the engagement in ways which were as flexible and transparent as we could. We used post-it notes to get feedback from people, and we ended up with 4,500 post-it notes. And what we did with them was to scan or photograph each one, upload it to Flickr, which is a web hosting site, and we tagged each one of them so that we could then check online what they were about and effectively give ourselves a kind of searchable database for all of that public input into the project. We ran weekly briefing sessions for the master planning team and passed all that through to them. And what resulted at the end of that process was a very clearly set out and very bold vision, which we summarised as 8 big ideas, which are on screen here, which ranged from the fairly straightforward. So people wanted, for example, affordable homes for living, so that homes were going to be built on the site for living in rather than for investment. But at the more complex end of things, people wanted the idea of one of the ideas which came out of it was the idea of a community made through exchange. So York has this incredible problem with inequality, and people acknowledged that and wanted to try and find ways of doing development on York Central, which acknowledged that and which found ways of working with it in a positive way. However, the final master plan, which then turned into an outline planning consent, didn't necessarily take all of these ideas on board in the way that we'd expected it to or hoped that it would do. And this left us in a position of trying to work out whether we simply walked away from the process and chalked it up as experience or whether we did something else. And what we did was the exploring complex issues early thing of saying, let's see if other people are prepared to work with us on this journey. So we held an event during York Design Week in 2019 and asked whether people across the city were happy to work with us to try and make sure that we collectively stewarded some of the good ideas that came out of the public vision onto the site itself. What we did then from 2019 through 2020 in the pandemic years was to hold events online and in person to try and develop the vision for the site into a comprehensive community plan for York Central. And what that involved was exploring these complex issues. So, for example, if you want birdsong outside your window, which people said they wanted, children playing in the street, which people said they wanted, tree-lined urban spaces where people have ownership, which people said they wanted, what does it actually take in order to get those things? So it's more than getting rid of traffic, although that's not easy in itself. How do you bring life into those streets and spaces, which then make them safe, welcoming spaces to be? What needs to be happening at ground level? So what kind of things need to face out onto the street, and what kind of activities need to be taking place, giving people access from the street level? And who has ownership of all of that, and how does that work? And very quickly, I mean, I come at this as an architect, and so very much thinking about places, spaces, and buildings. But very quickly, I realized that much of this is about economy and the kind of structures you put into place to enable things to happen. So York Central Co-owned, the body that came together, found itself in a situation where we had a community plan which worked within the possible. So within the outline planning consent for the site, there was the potential for some flexibility around what was built on the individual areas of the site. So the predominantly housing areas could have up to 25% other uses there. The predominantly commercial could have up to 25% housing. With it being a major development site, there was within national planning policy framework a requirement for 5% of the housing to be custom or self-built. And in the light of COVID, the original plans within the outline planning consent for 100,000 square metres of Grade A office space were clearly going to need a little bit more looking at, given revised patterns of working. So what we've ended up doing is developing proposals for a pilot project in 2 phases, looking at how we might develop a livable neighbourhood which puts commercial, community, social and cultural activity at street level to create life and to create ownership of those outdoor spaces, and to enable shaping of them to create green, livable outdoor rooms, and then puts a mixture of tenures of house types above to give a mixed community. So looking at a complete range of opportunity there, from market sale housing through discount market sale, through shared ownership to social rented housing, and trying to put together a project which is viable economically, viable in terms of the kind of mixed community get there, and all happens within the framework of co-ownership, so that it's whatever it's set up as, it remains as forever. This creates challenges, though. The first that we've noticed is that the big players, so councils, organisations like Homes England, are very used to dealing with community groups who are there to protest about not wanting things, but are much less used to dealing with community groups who are there with a positive vision of what they want to be able to do. And we found it very difficult to get over that hurdle. There's a constant challenge about democratic representation as soon as you start putting forward anything particularly specific. So as soon as we started putting forward proposals for this pilot project, the immediate question was, but does everybody want this? Does everybody in the city want it? I have no idea whether they do. I'd be surprised if they did. But as soon as you start putting forward ideas, you have to do something which carries forward in the direction that has general support. There are benefits of working with universities and change-making institutions. So in York, we have the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the UK's largest grant-giving body, and very much a kind of a place where ideas are taken seriously. But there is tension about how small players like York Central Co-owned work with those big players without ending up getting completely taken on board by their agendas rather than our agenda. Throughout that, though, there are kind of 3 bullet points which I'll put up on here. The first is propose, don't oppose. This has been our mantra all the way through. Whenever we've gone into a room for discussion about anything with anybody, we've gone in with positive ideas about it rather than simply going in with a range of things that we don't want to happen. So propose, don't oppose maybe as well, but certainly carry the propositions with you too. Engage people in the design process, because that's where the creativity is and that's where the fun is. we often wonder why people don't get involved in public engagement. But if it's a dreadful process where they're only being bribed with biscuits and tea, then why are they going to? Whereas if you get people involved in the process of developing a brief and developing a vision, it makes the whole thing much more satisfying for them to do so. And the third point I put here is that anger only goes so far and so long. And this is a lovely quote from Darren McGarvey, a Scottish rapper and poet, who talks about the need for a cleaner burning fuel. Anger is a destructive emotion, and eventually it grinds you down. And if you don't find something which is this cleaner burning fuel, then you're not going to be in there for the long run. And one of the things that we've learned over the last 6 years or so that we've been going is that you need to be there for the long run. And that very much does involve having positive stuff to talk about, positive stuff to engage with people around. These are some contact details, what we're up to. So York Central co-owned Yoko, this is our website. Please take a look at that. If you fancy joining our mailing list or even joining Yoko, then please do. And you can contact us through that email address and that Twitter handle. And I shall stop at that point because Esme has appeared.
Thank you so much, Phil. That was absolutely fascinating. I've scribbled down propose, not oppose. Oh, that's brilliant. I'm going to stick that on my computer. Thank you so much. Lots of really practical advice and great to understand what to do when things don't run to plan. So I'm going to just pause here. We've got time for some quick fire questions. So if anybody has a very direct question for Phil or wants to kind of unpick something, we've got a couple of minutes, and you can pop your hand up or you can put something in the chat.
Pauline's waving there.
Can you hear me?
That was very vigorous. Go for
Pauline, go for it.
Okay. I've recently set up a group called Battle for Trees to grow trees, protect trees, and educate about trees. Along comes, and it's really interesting that you're discussing local planning, because there's me merrily thinking about the love of trees and how we can plant more and educate people. And all of a sudden, along comes the government planning proposals to build all over the greenfield down here in Sussex, you know, and it's going to kill lots of trees and hedgerows. And people have joined my group in the hundreds saying, you've got to stop this because you're Battle for Trees. And from the sounds of it, this is not unusual from what, I mean, I'm new to this. I've just come out of business, you know, and started this side of things. It sounds like I'm not the only one that's got to handle planning along with the trees. And help, I'm drowning.
I guess the problem, so the issues here tend to be about what planning tends to be about. York has had this situation where we're just about to have a local plan, which will be the first one we've ever had. Well, I think we're the last local authority in the nation that still doesn't have one. But where the local plan came about through the conventional means of plan making, which is that most people did not get involved. We do not have a process of engaging with local people on a kind of rolling, proper, positive basis about what do you want to see happen in your city. And I guess my kind of thinking on that is that look for opportunities to get those positive conversations happening, because again, if you do end up in a situation where you are basically, you know, kind of staffing the battlements in ways which enable you to try and stave off bad stuff for as long as possible, you'll end up bitter and twisted and grey-haired very soon. Finding ways to get into that, to intervene in that positive planning process and look at, you know, what spatial strategy is, look at what how the local plan is developed, and starting to kind of talk to people within a local authority about how do you get involved in that in a positive way? How do you become friends of the planning process rather than opposition to it? Would seem to be certainly for me, that would be the way I'd suggest. And it's certainly the way we're trying to do it in York in terms of developing ways of getting involved.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. So we've got time for just one more question. Does anyone want to put their hand up? Otherwise, I can grab something from the chat.
Naomi is there with a hand up.
Naomi?
Yeah. Thank you. Hi. While I'm hearing the word planning, I'm hearing it from a different perspective than in direct relation to planting trees. And one of the biggest issues that I've had over my lifetime as an urban forester is that trees get planted with little or no thought. And if you want a tree to grow into maturity, and if that's really how you're going to get your quality canopy, there has to be a plan in place on how you will prepare that site to accommodate long-term tree growth. And invariably, whenever I hear about planting projects, I am not hearing those magic words of where all of it begins. So did York consider this?
I guess the line on that is that what normally happens is everything gets built and then whatever budget's left over gets spent on trees, which get plopped in wherever they get plopped in. And what we're trying to do is very different approach to that by saying to people, what do you want your environment to be about? What do you want the space outside your front door to be when you step out into it? And how can we therefore think about that with just the same degree of both economic and design firepower as we would do about the design of your kitchen or your living room or your hallway? So I guess it's that process of, and this picks up slightly on something Esme said earlier about people aren't necessarily 100% fascinated with trees all of the time, but they will have other concerns about how are their children going to play safely? How can the outdoor space be usable in hot summers? How can all of that stuff happen? How can they make use of that, take ownership of it and spend time outside? So it's addressing those kind of questions as part of the briefing process, ensuring that then becomes part of the design process and therefore does become part of the story right from day one, rather than streets being designed and at some point in the future some trees getting plonked into them. Does that kind of pick up on that okay?
Yes, in part, yes. Because this is where community and professionals really have to come together to determine this site needs this, if this tree is going to actually grow to be what we hope it will be.
Yep,
and it is that collaboration between citizen stakeholder and the professional who knows the strategies that have to be put in place that works best in these situations. Then you get trees to grow.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is something which is an absolute partnership between architects and other design professionals, between the people who are going to be living in the scheme and between the contractors who are going to build the thing, to make sure that information is shared right there across, and that us architects get out of the way of not wanting trees blocking views of our buildings and start thinking more about how we create environments which work both inside and outside to the same degree of care.
Can I just ask very quickly, Esme, in response to Pauline, the battle for trees, do you think, Phil, that we don't put enough emphasis on how we could actually design both to retain existing trees, plant new trees, but we don't actually invest sufficiently in that design time to do it properly, whether it's architects, landscape architects, the design team generally?
I think certainly in terms of engagement with communities, we don't spend enough time telling the full story, if you like. There's a narrative process about how places are going to be when they're lived in, and we don't go far enough into that. And I think that we desperately need to. We make all sorts of assumptions about the fact that people will want specific things and protect certain things, and that that people are generally protective of nature, but they're only protective of it when they can see what it gives them. And if it gives them better outdoor space, if it gives them better environment, if it gives them birdsong outside their window, then they will protect it. But you have to build that narrative first. And I think that planning process, to use a kind of broad term for it, is something we really need to take a lot more seriously. And that public engagement done in a way which enables people to engage positively and engage in design is the way to do that, rather than simply relying upon asking people what the closed questions. So yes.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you so much, Naomi and Pauline, for those great questions. I'm afraid we're going to have to move on. So I'm really, really pleased to introduce our next speaker, Catherine Nutchins, who is an urban forestry consultant. And Catherine and I have been working together on a few things over the last few months, so it's great to see her again today. Thanks, Catherine, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Catherine Nutchins. I was previously working as a tree officer in Sheffield, and then community forestry manager, which was a really interesting time. And then I was the urban lead at the Woodland Trust, where I was sort of part of the campaigns team. So I got to see a lot of kind of emotive campaigning around trees and things like that. And it's been really interesting. It's helped me to gain a lot of insight into people and trees. So I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. There we are. So I'm going to talk a bit about the inside. Are you able to see that? I'm just seeing a different thing on my screen.
Yes, looks good.
Yeah, it's there. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the importance of community engagement roles in urban forestry, because I've got a background in community engagement, and there's some things that are very clear, that, you know, kind of trees over time are very important, and having those, linking those trees and those people. So people that work with trees and people have lots of different names. I mean, I used to call them community foresters. It was part of the work of, in Sheffield Trees and Woodlands team for the last 25 years, but it could be tree rangers, tree champions, woodland creation officers, and their kind of role is to work with the community to increase urban canopy cover. But there's more to it than just planting trees. It's about fostering advocacy with local people, understanding the community, so that they can care for trees that they've planted and worked on in communities. And it also promotes agency inclusion. And what I mean by that is that often tree projects are done by kind of communities that are more affluent. They will be the volunteers, the tree wardens, and what have you. In communities that have more things going on, it's less of a priority to them. And what these roles do, they mean they're there to kind of help to hold the hand of those communities and to kind of set things up, get the groundwork going, so that those communities can engage with trees just as much as the affluent ones. The role also provides a first route for some people into careers into arboriculture and forestry, so certainly with volunteers and maybe apprenticeship schemes and things like that. And importantly, what it does is it provides a person who is the link between local authority or whichever landowner it is, the operations and the public. And that is really important and something that could save a lot of money. So, I mean, what do we want to see? Well, we want to see a bit less of this. This is Sheffield protests, although I'm not just talking about Sheffield here. Obviously, that got rid of all goodwill. It cost the council millions. It didn't help anybody at all. And a bit more of this, which is some local school children who are mulching trees on a green space in quite well, certainly one of the less affluent areas of Sheffield. So first of all, let's think about the key players. Now, I'm going to apologise here because I'm quite visual and I like to use pictures to explain things, but I didn't want any photographs of anyone in particular, so I have used AI cats. So either thank you or sorry in advance. So let's have a look at the first key player. Now, that's a member of the public. They've got children, you know, standing outside their house. Their knowledge of urban forestry is very low, tends to be based on opinion, but also it can be changed. You can frame it, you can influence it. Their accountability as a citizen, they pay taxes, they obey the law. That's kind of what they want to do. And their priorities, I mean, as Esme has said, is kind of, you know, looking after their family, you know, having a job, being healthy and being happy. So, you know, they're kind of peripherally interested, but generally, you know, urban forestry is not necessarily to do with them. So the next people is the volunteer. So we're talking about maybe the tree wardens, the friends group. You know, we've talked about planting an orchard. Now they're likely to have more knowledge. So they're going to have insights, particularly into their specific project that they're working on. They're accountable to each other as a group. They give regular time, and their priority is basically achieving their group's objective. They're keen to do it. It's something that they're doing in their free time, something they feel is important. So, you know, that's the most important thing for them. So next sort of lay person is the campaigner. Now we've got campaigner here with some AI cat language protesting about trees. What do they know about urban forestry? It depends. It depends who's leading the campaign. Their information might be from, you know, from a campaign website or who they talk to. It's not always true. Like, this is where things start fraying edges. There's a lot of kind of conspiracy and all that kind of thing. But one thing that sort of covers it all is that they're angry. Accountability, like some of them will be completely committed to the cause and, you know all the detail of everything. Other people quite like protesting. They, you know, they kind of want to stick it to the man. Once the campaign is over, they kind of disappear into the ether. But their main priority as a all is to win the campaign. That's the priority for them. So now we're going to move on to the professional side of things. Now I call these people, this cat here with this lovely hat on, the land managers. So this is planners, the highways, the parks, the housing, it covers a whole remit of people. But basically they are managing the land to make it function for the public. Their knowledge of forestry is medium. They know about trees and kind of what the regulations are. But for them, what they're going to see is a lot of problems caused by trees. They don't get rewarded for the benefits that trees, that trees occur. But they do see a lot of the problems. They are accountable to council leaders and to what's going on, kind of strategic visions, and as a professional to kind of keep things safe. And they have multiple priorities. So, things like health and safety, following regulations. There's an awful lot of things that they've got to do to make sure that they're doing their job properly. Then we've got the tree officer. So that's the kind of ARB role within the council. They have extremely good knowledge about trees. That is their focus. They'll be doing ash dieback surveys and all sorts of different things. They will have some awareness to the public because it's a public facing role, so they'll talk about it, but it won't be their main priority. They're accountable to the trees to make sure that the trees are healthy and safe, and they presumably want more trees because they're tree officers and they like trees. That's what their role is. But to the public and to planning and, as a professional, to make sure they do their job properly, and kind of health and safety priorities, planning, just delivering things properly and sharing expertise where it's required. So the last one is what I'm talking about, the community forester. So this is the person that's the link. So their knowledge, they know a lot about trees. They will be working with trees and the tree officer, but they also know a lot about communities, the kind of ecology within the city. They're accountable to the community, they're accountable to the trees and obviously everyone in department because they're providing that link. And what they do is they get that communication between stakeholders really, really well. They get that good communication happening between stakeholders. So here's an example. We've got a volunteer group. They want to plant a community orchard, which is very relevant to what we've just been talking about. So they talk to the community forester, and the community forester says, well, let me see and go and talk to my colleagues. And they talk to the person who manages the land, who says, yes, you can plant it here, but not there because there's a big pipe underneath it or whatever. They talk to the tree officer that might give them some tips about how to make it flourish, what they might need to do. These guys talk to each other as well, so they make sure that everyone's on the same page. They feed back to the community forester. The community forester can feed that back to the community group, and then they can all work together with the public to do lovely public planting days or orchard restoration or whatever it is that they're doing. So everyone's a winner. Everyone is happy in that scenario. Everyone's been discussed. Equally, redevelopment. So we're redeveloping, it might be a city centre in Plymouth, for example, or perhaps street trees in Sheffield. Whatever it is, they're redeveloping the city centre. Now, what should happen is that they know that there's a lot of trees that are going to be affected, so they talk to the tree officer and say what can happen. And it could be an ARB consultant, but I would say that somebody that actually works in the local authority would be the best person to talk to. The tree officer lets them know, but also because this is going to affect the public and trees are an emotive issue. So they're going to talk to the community forester, who then can come up with, a bit like, what Phil's been talking about, a well-designed and meaningful consultation while also managing expectations. So you're not going to give the public the full reign of deciding what happens, but it's designed, there's meaning in there. And they talk to the public about it. They also talk, because they know about who's going to make the most noise, to the volunteers and discuss them. They know what it's going to be, what it's going to be like. They feed back, and then the community forester feed back, and then we know, everyone knows what's going on. Everyone is talked about. So just the last one. This is a slightly different one. So this is where there's no time to talk to anybody. We're doing a thing, and we're just going to send out a questionnaire and send it out to the public. Now, there's no right of reply really on this that's any way meaningful, and it's just telling the public. And what happens is that the volunteers, the engaged people, start to get annoyed. They say, what's going on? We don't know what's happening. And they talk to the public, and then they get annoyed. So you get this pressure that's building up. It's not being discussed. We haven't got a community forester in here. And you end up with a protester. You get a big protest, and that costs loads of money. Getting that reputation back, getting the goodwill back, it really damages the council in lots of different ways. So it's really important to do with and not to. Right, super quickly. So a wish list for community engagement roles, they need to be permanent. Like, this is a wish list, but permanent roles are so important because you have that time to build up those relationships with the community. They should be core funded, so not 2 years of lottery funding, but actually core funded by the council as a service that the council do, and based in the same organisation as the other colleagues, because that way you've got no barriers to communication. And just one thing is, the responsibility shouldn't be added to the tree officer role, because they haven't got time. They've got to look at the trees. So unless there's plans to do it, then that's what we'll do. So I've overrun slightly. I will be quiet. Thank you for listening. If anyone has any questions, that would be hopefully.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Right, AI cats, that is the way forward, I think, forever now. That's absolutely brilliant. It's so good to see that visual mapping and see all the key players. Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, we are running over a little bit, so I'll just take maybe 1 or 2 very quick questions. Anybody has their hand up? Otherwise, I'll grab something from the chat.
Esme, there was a good one from Mark Serrett. Mark, are you there? There somewhere. But how do you actually frame the conversation to get positive outcomes? It was sort of emerged with Phil's talk, but I think applies equally to Catherine's.
Yes, I am here.
Oh.
So.
Hi, Mark. Thanks. Do you want to read out your question?
It was just working on the basis that low traffic neighbourhoods, when they were approached sort of around London, ended up with a very negative impact from the community. But livable streets had a much higher impact when they were looked at in Brighton. And I just want to know how that was framed and how you went about the community discussion. This is to Phil to try and bring all of that together, because they're the same thing. How have they got different ends of the spectrum on how you go about the engagement? That was all I wanted to flag up.
Thanks, Mark. Catherine, you may have thoughts on that as well. So the kind of labelling of things, and does that matter? And then I can let Phil come in as well.
Phil, do you want to answer that one?
Damn. Okay, I'll come out of the shadow. Yeah, I've answered in the chat box. I think the thing here is about narrative, and it's kind of shifting the way debate happens away from labels on things onto what actually happens, and the stories about how that space is going to work. So again, kind of low traffic neighborhoods, 15-minute neighbors, walkable neighbors, whatever you want to call them. If that's basically about people's experience of living there, being about safety outside their front door, about play, the streets being suitable for kids to play, about quiet, about all that sort of stuff, then that's the stuff to frame the debate around. And it's of course, at some point you've got to stick a poster up or do a website with something on it. But I kind of think the further away from those labels you can get, and the closer you can get to talking about how it feels, what it means, how it might be for people who live there, then that's the way to go. I think it's that shifting from labels and telling stories about how a place would be.
And then tying that to the last presentation, clearly if it failed, they probably didn't have the community forester, and where it succeeded, they probably did have the community forester.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Well, no, that's not true, because they did have the community forester in Sheffield, but they chose to not use that part. I think they felt, well, I mean, who knows what they felt, but like they actually using those permanent roles within councils, because what happens is that you get someone who's funded for a couple of years, kind of builds expectations within the community, and then they leave, and that's the problem. Then all their knowledge disappears until the next thing that comes along. So having those long-term people who actually know the ecology, and when we're looking at things like diversity of inclusion, where we have people who are working in areas that actually represent the the society that actually lives in that area. So that's where things like community forestry officers can come in, because they have that knowledge of their own cities. So I mean, it is a wish list. I mean, like, you know, with kind of austerity and things like that, all of that has disappeared. But it's you know, it would be great to see a more people focused approach in the future.
Thank you, Catherine. Really interesting, and Jenny's just put in the chat a really wonderful point if people want to look there about kind of narrative, not education, and that people absorb information in different ways. So it's really important. I'm going to keep going if that's okay. Obviously Catherine will be around at the end, all the other speakers, so we'll have a general discussion then, so keep your questions coming in stored up. So next up, I'm really pleased to introduce Audrey Jarvis from the Lewis Urban Arboretum Project, give her presentation. So over to you, Audrey. Thank you.
Has Audrey's screen frozen?
Oh dear.
Should we go to John and then see if John, are you there? Go to John and then come back to Audrey, and I'll see what's happened.
Okay. Hope we haven't lost Audrey. John, are you ready? You're outside.
I am here. Oh, well, I don't know if I'd say I'm ready, but I'm here. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you okay. Are you all right to get going now, a little bit early?
Yeah, I'm not going to be any more prepared in 15 minutes than I am now, so that's fine.
Okay, well, wonderful to have you on. Thank you, John. You are the Chief Exec of the Arboricultural Association, and you're going to give us a talk about the Stonehouse Arboretum, I think.
I am indeed. Thank you. Well, hi, everyone. I hope this works. I decided that I'd go outside. It's a nice sunny day in Stonehouse in Gloucestershire, which is for those of you who maybe are overseas, Gloucestershire is the finest county in the UK, and Stonehouse is obviously the best town in that county. It has got terrible reception though, so that might not work particularly well. But hey, we're outside, we're in Stonehouse, and I wanted to talk to you about a project that I have been working on. The Arboricultural Association has been supporting, called the Stonehouse Community Arboretum Project. Basically, the idea is it's not a sort of conventional arboretum, it's more of a conceptual arboretum, let's say. So it is all of the trees on public and private land within the town of Stonehouse, all have become part of the Stonehouse Community Arboretum. We're down in the southwest of the UK, as I said, in Gloucestershire, God's own country. And we've got about 8,500 people living here. We've got wealthier areas, poorer areas, all the normal kind of stuff that you've got in towns across the UK. And we kind of haven't got anything that special in the way of trees, but part of the idea of the Arboretum project was to celebrate what we did have and to try and engage people and pull the community together through trees and through tree care. And that was sort of the driving force behind it. And everything that we do, I'm going to show you, there's a reason we're outside. I'm going to show you a couple of trees. I thought that would be more interesting than just talking to you from my office, which is how I normally do these things. In fact, there's a chance that I've lost reception minutes ago and I'm just talking to myself on a park bench, but that's not as uncommon as you might think it would be. The Stonehouse Community Arboretum is a town council project, really, and we run it according to this plan, which I hope you may be able to see. It is the Stonehouse Community Arboretum Management Plan. It was adopted by the Town Council in 2021. And within the plan, it has got 5 sort of key policies, really. And I'm just going to read you those quickly to explain the sort of founding principles of what the Arboretum is all about. So the first one is that trees will be regarded as an asset, not a liability. Sounds pretty straightforward, but that's an important point to get across. Trees are a good thing. They're not a dangerous thing or a bad thing or something that's going to cause problems. They're a good thing. And that is how we're going to approach trees in Stonehouse. The second point is that existing trees will be cared for and managed appropriately. So we want to make sure the right people are looking after trees, not just someone who's going around offering to tarmac your drive and paint your guttering at the same time. Arboriculture is a complex discipline. It's a dangerous job. It's an important job, and we need to make sure we've got the right professionals doing the right job. The third point is that new trees will be established responsibly and sustainably. We don't just want to go planting loads and loads of trees and tick some kind of tree planting boxes. We want to be planting, obviously, right tree in the right place, as is so often said, but we want to be planting maybe an unusual selection of trees. We want to be getting diversity of trees. If anyone out there is thinking native trees are better, no, they're not. Back in your box. We've ended that argument a long time ago. We need diversity in tree species, particularly in our urban areas, and we're going to embrace that in the Stonehouse Community Arboretum. And there's nothing in there, like I say, about tree planting figures. We haven't got tree planting targets. We've got tree establishment targets. So the town council here has signed up to a policy that says we will ensure that 95% of the trees that we plant are alive 3 years after planting. Now, those numbers could be, you could say that they could be higher or lower or whatever. It is still quite arbitrary. But at the end of the day, we've got a tree establishment target, not a tree planting target. And I think that's one of the first times that that's been included in a tree strategy anywhere. The fourth point on the policy list is that the urban forest of Stonehouse is a community arboretum for everybody. This isn't about planting trees in nice places where nice people live and where they'll look after the trees. And let's not worry about everyone else because they don't deserve trees or appreciate trees. This is about green equity. This is about ensuring access to everybody. We want to make sure that the trees and the maintenance and everything we do with trees is equally spread across our community, and that it's an arboretum for everybody. And as Catherine said, this is about doing stuff with people, not doing stuff to people. And that's also how you get engagement and buy-in and support and hopefully reduce things like vandalism. And then on the same theme, the fifth point is that collaboration will be at the heart of urban forest management. This isn't something that just the town council can do alone. It's not something just me as a sort of mouth on legs who goes around shouting about how great trees are. It's not something I can do. It's got to be the whole town. In Stonehouse, we've got various different authorities. We've got Gloucestershire County Council looking after the roads, Stroud District Council looking after housing estates. We've got schools. We've got the Stonehouse Town Council looking after parks and green spaces. We've got some really big landowners. We've got lots of small landowners. We've got Network Rail. We've got a canal company. Lots and lots of different landowners need to work together and work together with the community in order to deliver the outcomes that we need. So that's the principle that sit behind the plan. It's available free online. You can easily grab hold of it on there. I've still got some hard copies left. If you're very, very lucky, I might even give you a printed copy of it. But the reason we're outside is I want to show you a couple of trees. I'm not sure how well this is going to work. I could probably try and turn my camera around, but I'll do this so you can enjoy.
We're losing you, John.
At the same time. The globe willow is my favourite tree. Can you not see me? Can you not see my face?
We can see your face, but we
anyone
can't see the
my
tree.
face?
We can see you. You're looking great.
Can you
But
see
where's
behind
the tree?
me? The tree's behind me.
Excellent. Got it.
Can you see that where I'm pointing?
We can see, John, yes.
Who knows what's going on? Hey, I'm just going to keep going anyway. Perfect. Behind me, that's not my big green afro. That is indeed the globe willow, which is a wonderful tree. Over my shoulder is the Globe, which until about 2 weeks ago was the finest drinking establishment in Stonehouse. It's now shut down. You will say we're very unhappy, but we're mainly drinking on park benches now, which is what we all did when we were growing up around here anyway. But this is a wonderful tree. We know this tree was planted in 1921. And the tree management plan was launched in 2021. So when we were trying to find a good way to launch the Arboretum management plan, we decided to hold a birthday party for the trees. It was a bit of a gimmick, but it kind of really engaged people. And we sent out party invitations. We had a band. We had cake. We pollinated the tree, so we could show people why we were looking after the tree in this particular way. I'm not endorsing pollen. Got people engaged. We had about 250 people came out to enjoy a really great day. Quite a few people sang happy birthday to the tree, which is a little bit odd, but hey, I got involved. It was great. And this tree really is at the heart of the town. It's a well-known tree. Lots of people have got stories about the tree. They remember it. They care about it. And this is in any way, in some ways, I suppose, the symbol, I suppose, of the Stonehouse Community Arboretum. So a really, really important tree to Stonehouse. And that is also why it features on the front cover of the Community Arboretum plan. The other tree I wanted to show you is just over there. And I'm going to walk over and show you in a minute. But I've got reception here. And I'm not sure if I'll have reception there. So I'm going to tell you about it. Then I'll go over and show it to you. But We had used to be a horse chestnut on the verge. It's just in front of me. That about 15 years ago failed, and Gloucestershire County Council Highways Department cut it down. They felled the tree for safety reasons. And at the time, and for a few years following that, Gloucestershire County Council had a policy which said they would not replace street trees that they removed, and they wouldn't replace them on the basis that maybe in the future those trees might cause problems. It was an absolutely terrible policy. So when Stonehouse said, please, can you replace our tree? They said, no, we're not going to replace it because that is a policy decision that we've made. Absolutely terrible. We weren't very happy with it at all. But there's people driving past in their cars looking at me a bit strangely. But you've appeared. Does that mean I've always run out of time? Is that what it means? Not if that's what it means. Am I running out of time?
1 minute, John.
Oh, 1 minute's fine. We've just wasted 5 seconds with me asking that question. So anyway, they wouldn't replace the tree. But as I said, in the Community Arboretum Management Plan, we've got something in there that says trees are regarded as an asset, not a liability. So once that had been adopted into town policy, we were able to go to Gloucestershire County Council and say, well, that might have been good enough a few years ago, but it's not good enough now. In that little gap behind me, that's where the tree was. So we talked to them about it, and thanks to someone called Sarah Noons at Gloucestershire County Council, who's done wonderful things in improving how they approach trees, we got this tree planted here, this one over my shoulder. It's an Amelanchier, and the way it worked was that we wanted a tree planted. There's a young lad whose mum used to work in the Globe called Louis. Louis really likes trees, wanted to be part of it, so we gave him a tree brochure and said, pick a few trees out of there, let us know which one you want. He picked a tree, he said, I want this tree. We ordered the Amelanchier, and then guess what? Gloucestershire County Council planted the wrong tree. We were very disappointed. So then we had to get them back, but they removed it and they replaced it with this one. And on this little tree here, we've got a watering bag. We've got an Arbor Association watering tag. It is quite a small tree. We planted it somewhere different to the old one because we're going to plant a larger tree over there now that we've got buy-in from Gloucestershire County Council. It's also watered by a chap called Big Steve, who's around tree, so he's engaged in it as well. So in this tree sort of reflects the professional side of things, the Arbor Association, the Town Council, Gloucestershire County Council, the youth of the town, other residents of the town, people in the pub, everyone coming together, looking after this tree in accordance with the Community Arboretum Management Plan. So there's lots of ways that people can get involved. We've got lots more to do. We're only part way there, but it's going very well. And I am delighted to be able to welcome you to Stonehouse. And we'll be happy to talk to anyone who wants to know more about trees in this wonderful part of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Absolutely brilliant. We got you for most of that. I'm taking away happy birthday tree, Big Steve. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Any quick questions for John? There was an interesting one in the chat, but I'll just pause in case anyone puts their hand up. You're getting lots of love in the chat, John. I'm not sure if you can see the chat. Don't think you can. Okay, I don't think anyone's put up their hand. So there was an interesting question about, just scrolling through.
I haven't got it on, but thank you very much. I always like a lot of love.
Okay, good. So there was a question from James, which I don't know if you can answer this. Why does the statutory biodiversity net gain metric seemingly give a higher value to native tree species, even if actually less appropriate in many development locations and encourages lack of diversity? Did you get that? John seems to have frozen.
John, are we going to get you back in the office so you can help with some questions at the end, because they're coming through with you now? I
think that's a good idea. So if John can head back to the office for the last few questions.
It broke up a bit there, and I couldn't hold all the questions, but I think it was about,
we can't hear you. We're sending you back to the office so we can talk to you later.
Native trees.
John, we can't hear you very well. I think you've got the question. So, but if you head back somewhere that you have internet, and I'll tag you in or somebody can tag you in the question, and you can maybe answer it in the chat.
Yep.
Brilliant.
I mean, I could potentially answer that one.
Yes, please. Thank you.
There's I mean, there's been loads of research sort of over the last 30, 40 years around how great native trees are for biodiversity. But what there hasn't been is about how great non-native trees are for biodiversity. There's certainly work going on, and Andy Hirons from Myersco is looking to put a biodiversity metric into the TDAG tree species selection guide. But there is a kind, almost like a religious adherence to everything, it must be native. I think we need to move away from this kind of narrative and think more about what aim are we actually trying to achieve with the tree? Because if a tree is not going to survive in a situation in a street or a city centre, then it's not doing any good at all. So we need to think about, the right reason, the right tree, the right place, what do we want that tree to do? And then think about the species side of things. So it'd be really nice if that had got through to the biodiversity metric when it was put together for cities. But unfortunately, obviously things are moving so quickly that it takes time. I imagine that is the answer.
Thank you, Catherine. That's really, really helpful. Thank you. Audrey, have we got you? You all right?
As far as I know, yes.
Brilliant, brilliant. Naomi, sorry, I know you can see your hand up. Do you mind saving a question for the end, and we'll come back to it in the general discussion or after the next talk?
Sure.
Thank you
Sure,
so
absolutely.
So I'm really pleased, Audrey, we've got you back online to hand over to you, and you're from the Lewis Urban Arboretum Project. So thank you very much. I'll let you present.
Hello. Just try and move you out the way so I can see you. Right. My name's Audrey Jarvis. I'm not a tree expert in any way. I'm a volunteer. I used to be a teacher and a head teacher, and we used to like planting trees and hedges with the children. I'm now a member of the Friends of Lewis, the Civic Society of Lewis in East Sussex. And since 2012, we've relaunched the Trees Committee, and our vision is Lewis as a town in the trees, not just a town which happens to have some trees in it. I won't be able to tell you anything very knowledgeable that you don't already know. What I'm going to do is explain what we're doing and why we're doing it. We plant trees in verges and green spaces on public land because we don't own any of our own. We plant wildlife hedgerows wherever we can, where there's a fence or perimeter of some grounds. In between times, we spend a lot of time looking after all the trees and hedges we've planted. We respond to applications for tree works and put in ideas, because there are a lot of people on our committee who have a lot of experience in design and landscape management, but also proposing different ideas if there are a lot of trees that are meant to be felled for new developments. And we're doing it to increase tree canopy cover for climate resilience, and because trees are beautiful, and to improve biodiversity both for wildlife and for us. We started off, as I said, in 2012 when we had two substantial legacies for tree planting. That's when our committee was formed, though there had been a previous committee in the 70s and 80s. We identified significant trees and gaps in the planting of the existing tree canopy by paying somebody with a grant from South Downs National Park to do a survey. And more recently, with Keith's help, we organised an iTree eco survey of Lewis to record all the ecosystem values of our existing trees. That was partly so that we could say, yes, the trees are valuable because of this for air pollution, this for water retention, etc. It estimated that our current tree canopy covers 11.5% at the time, and that the recommended minimum then was 20%. And we use all that information to help us gain support from the community and in our grant applications, quite successfully so far. This is our first planting project because the initial survey showed that the industrial sites were quite bare of trees. So we planted these 5 trees: Acer platanoides, Sorbus intermedia, Ulmus americana, Prunus avium, and Alnus incarna. We haven't actually planted on any industrial sites since then because it is quite tricky to get the landlords to agree, and because a lot of those sites are up for proposed redevelopment, some of which includes more tree planting, sadly some tree felling as well. One of the projects that we did quite early on was trees for birds, and that was inspired by the waxwings that came to a tree which lives near where we live. It was a Sorbus huperensis on a green bank, and all the other red berries on all the trees nearby had long gone with all the other birds, and these white berries had been left to last. And there must have been about 100 waxwings came and landed on there and ate them all. But sadly, that tree died not long afterwards, and we got permission to replace it with 3 white beams for the berries, and then lots of other trees which would have seeds and berries for the birds. Another project that we did on the local cemetery, which is recognised as a local wildlife site because it has substantive nature conservation value. One of our friends has done bee surveys there, and he's recorded several rare bees, sort of 30+ species, and at least 4 rare ones. So Lewes District Council said that we could plant 32 trees and 3 lengths of hedgerows mostly around the perimeter of the cemetery, so it didn't interfere with the graves, to provide sources of food for the bees and other pollinators. And the idea is that between them, they would give food throughout the year. We do a lot of work with the community. For example, this year we had about 80 tree plots, and we've prioritised the 39 that the residents have asked for. We get a lot of good suggestions from them, and that means that they want them and they'll help to look after them by watering them. And this little row here of trees is when we were asked to plant some to waymark Tingle's Way, which is one of the routes through Lewes, which is an offshoot of the South Downs Way, which takes you past some lovely trees. We like to involve children in planting trees because they are our future and the trees' future. And it's important that they know how valuable they are. And it's quite surprising to find out how much the children already know about trees and how important they are. We've planted with some forest school children from different schools, some parents and toddlers of a preschool group that was, little children who were barely able to walk, but they learned how to plant a little woodland trust whip and pat it down. The Beaver Scouts we've done a lot of work with, and one of our best projects in January 2022 and 2023 was planting around the perimeter of 2 schools on their shared school field, so that all the children and all the members of staff planted at least 1 whip. And when we saw them afterwards around Lewes, they could almost, give us an update on how they were doing. And their parents said they still knew exactly where their tree was. In 2022, one of the groups we belong to in partnership is the Lewes Nature Mosaic Project, where we're trying to make connected green spaces and green corridors all over Lewes. And it involves the the Nature Reserve, Wildflower Lewis, Lewis Swift supporters, and us, all working together. And we got a couple of grants to establish a tree and wildflower nursery, and this little rowan here is an example of one of the trees that we have grown from seed, which in November they'll be ready to plant out in a forest school area at one of our local schools. We also plant specimen trees, not just native trees. We're trying to go for a variety in case one particular sort of tree gets a disease which spreads over Sussex. And some of them, like the nettle tree, hop hornbeams, tulip tree, and Japanese pagoda tree that we planted, are all doing very well at the moment, especially after we've had such a very wet start to this year. That's done them a lot of favours. We've reckoned that we've planted, labelled and looked after 67 different varieties of trees so far, and that enabled us to get Lewes accredited as an arboretum town by ArbNet. Lewes used to have a lot of trees in pavements, but a lot of them have gone because when they've been felled, they haven't been replaced. But this is a project that we're very proud of with East Sussex and Lewes District Councils, where we got together and raised the funds to replace the 7 trees shown in the top photograph over 100 years ago. They now have 7 trees in very similar places, and the residents love them, but they were very expensive and they do take a lot of looking after. One of our most recent projects last season was planting gateway trees to welcome people into Lewes, especially now that we're an arboretum town, because there was also been a campaign to bring back elms. We made sure that a lot of those were elm trees, which were meant to be disease resistant. And we've got plans to plant 10 more trees in this particular row later in the year, going further up. So it's a really nice entrance to Lewes, we hope. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Audrey. You're absolutely perfectly on time. So thank you very, very much. I was just going to say, it's so wonderful to hear from someone who is actually a volunteer working in a community group, because you just get that the other side of everything. And I love that you're now an arboretum town, and you've done so much. So absolutely fantastic project. Thank you so much for your presentation. Does anyone have any burning questions for Audrey?
Esme, I saw that but Fernanda had one on how all the funding takes place.
Yes. Fernando, I don't know if you want to, it was a very simple question, so I can just repeat that. Audrey, how is all the planting funded, basically?
Well, we started off with the 2 legacies, and then we applied for different grants like Tesco Bags of Help, Sussex Community Fund. The local authorities Treescape Fund has funded 60 trees over 3 years, including this year. We're also one of the partners of the Ouse Valley Climate Action Group, and they have pledged to give us money for 10 trees for 3 years, and we're coming into the 3rd year now. It's just applying to fairly local grant bodies that that know where we're talking about, that we get the money from.
Thanks, Audrey. And just from looking through other questions, do you find that is often you doing that work, or do you kind of share that load out for finding the funding?
It's not me personally. Well, I tend to find the funding, mostly because a lot of the other people on the Trees Committee, who are a lot more knowledgeable than me, that we all share ideas and they have other jobs to do, whereas I don't have another job to do. So So yes, and we get ideas from residents as well. Some people have particular things that they ask for, and we take those into consideration.
Brilliant.
And there's a question there about utilities checks. Do you want me to do that?
Yes, and there was another one just before that. So there's one about investigations before planting, and then another really interesting one about how do you pick the tree species, and did you get any help with that?
With the first of all, the utilities check, we have to sort of apply for East Sussex County Council or the highways roads. We have to actually fill in an application form with them with all the details about the verges and everything. And if that's accepted, which it always has been, fingers crossed, then we ask for the service checks, the service maps, and we go through those and make sure that, you know, because one particular wide verge just had about every utility you can imagine that coming into Lewes, so we avoided that one. With Lewes District Council, it's the same. They give us the service maps and we look at them together. And then we go around with the CAT scanner and we mark out individual sites. And for the tree species, and I say the other people on the trees committee are very well qualified. Many of them have been all over the world and they know what looks good and what does well. And because we've been going for 12 years now, we also know what does well in Lewes because we've got very chalky ground. So that obviously influences us. We want our trees to thrive.
Brilliant, thank you. And there's one other really interesting question about maintenance and kind of the long-term care, which keeps cropping up as a theme. When you get funding in, does that funding cover the care and maintenance of trees once they've been planted?
It probably would if we asked for it, and I think it does for like the local authority treescapes fund. I know it covered the watering because the last 2 years we had to get a bowser to go around all of our trees because it was so dry. The maintenance we do between us, the volunteers, and the councillors are, well, the Lewes District Council in particular are very, very helpful in that, you know, if they are doing some work nearby, they can, you know, do our trees as well. And Keith is very helpful at looking after the trees. And there's another member of our group who has his own sort of woodland and forestry, and he looks after the trees, especially those in the great big long road near him, and makes sure that they're watered and mulch and everything. So it's sort of shared out.
Fantastic. And just leading on from the point you just made, there's another really good question from Laura, which was how closely do you work with the council? Do you have a community forestry officer or similar who acts as your contact point?
Well, one of the Lewes District, I hope it's all right to say this, the Lewes District Council officer who is the specialist advisor for parks, green spaces, and lots of other things, is a very, very active member of our trees committee and also works in a voluntary capacity. So that's a very strong link with the district council, who own a lot of the land that we plant on. And that's really good because he can suggest plots of land that belong to them where we might want to plant, that we might not particularly be aware of, that they're up for grabs, so to speak. With the Sussex County Council, they're very helpful, but the person who was in post previously was a member of the Trees Committee, but the current person in the role, I think, as with many councils, he's got so many jobs that he has got a bit of time pressure. But he has been very helpful.
Good. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Audrey. Really practical, useful advice there. Thank you so much. Keith, are you there? Just before I introduce you. Keith is there. Welcome, Keith. Thank you so much. So really pleased to introduce Keith Saker, who is the Urban Forestry Director at Barton Trees. So over to you, Keith, to your presentation. Thank you.
Keith, you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yep, perfect.
Right, okay. All right. Well, being the most practiced one at doing these sort of things, it's seems to be me that's made the cock up of it. Anyway, so community tree planting, advice, information, and best practice. So we've listened to some inspiring stories from people who are probably more experienced than I am and deal more with community. But what I'm going to, this presentation is hopefully going to be inspiring, hopefully will encourage people to, more importantly, ask questions. And the foundation of this is working with community groups for a long part of the career, of my career, at many, many different levels, including the guy in the orange bib there is me doing community training with a large group of people very close to here. So what I'm going to be talking about is this. So a simple search on the internet will quickly illustrate the amount of advice available for community groups on the subject of tree planting. Woodland Trust, Tree Council, RHS, Greater London Authority, Treesphere, and many others provide very informed explanations. They provide useful diagrams, they provide illustrations and photographs, and copious amounts of other useful information. There is a but though, and I think the but from my perspective is so often the groups seem to be in competition with each other. The information is not always complete and it's and I won't say biased, but it doesn't seem to me when looking at it to complement. So the focus always seems to be primarily on seedlings, whips, transplants, and all of the trees that are very young and small. And as you've just heard from Audrey with Lewis, it seems to me more and more community groups are now becoming involved in planting of larger standard trees, the larger standard trees. Yet nowhere within the information on the websites could I find a description of what different size trees actually meant, how you describe them, what's the difference between a standard and a seedling. And I think all these little things make it incredibly difficult for community groups to actually engage and make decisions about what they want to do and what the best methodology would be. And it's interesting going out and talking to the groups, and you say to us, well, as a professional, you say to a community group, oh, you want an 8 to 10 standard, and it just slides off the tongue. And what comes back is often a blank look as, well, what are you talking about? So I think there are gaps in what we say and the information we give. And there are many gaps and inconsistencies. So the different sizes of trees are not described, outlining the choices available. So different size trees for different purposes. There appears to be little or no discussion about actually buying the trees from the nursery and how to select a nursery to supply the trees. And I think this again is quite important when you're considering buying standards. There's little discussion of the nursery production systems, and as I've experienced elsewhere, the difference between planting a bare root tree and a containerized tree and a root ball tree, and they all work, are really significant when you're looking at the age range, the complexity, the number of volunteers you have. Which of those production systems is actually going to link in to what you're doing on the ground or what the community are trying to achieve? There seems to be very little indication as to how to select good quality trees. What are we looking for? Particularly when we're looking for a standard tree. What are we looking for? What are the characteristics of that tree? What should it look like? Where are the problems? So that whole procurement side of things seems to be poorly explored. And I'm fully aware that on some occasions, for instance, the good work that Trees for Cities do, the good work that the Woodland Trust do, very often they will take over the management of supply, and there'll be a professional intermediary. But very often the community group are starting from zero with very little professional information or very little professional assistance. And it seems to me there's like this chasm, this black hole, where that information isn't available to them. And another gap, and this is not a complete list, but it's how to store and manage the trees once they've been delivered. Now, it's all very well if a local authority is able to provide space, but how do you do that if they're not being stored on a local authority space? And in fact, where can you store them? And what should you do while those trees are in storage? Planting advice. This is planting advice taken from a major source of community information, but I'm asking the question, is it enough? So you have descriptions of slip planting, you've got descriptions of T-notch planting, but they're very, very shallow in the depth they go to talk about it. And what surprised me when we're talking about pit planting, which is how we plant trees in the grass verges and landscape parks, as Audrey described, there's no image at all. There's no image of pit planting, although pit planting is recommended, and that surprised me. So I'm aware of time and aware of, but this is working in with conjunction with TDAG and working in conjunction with the National Trust. We've actually tried to produce a step and phased process. So we've tried to identify some of the elements of setting up, have a clear idea of what the aims and objectives are. And that's been referred to by several speakers, particularly Naomi, who actually spoke about have a vision, have a meaning for it. Financial resources available. And I'm not going to read through them all because the recording is going to be available to you. And hopefully some of these points will be things that you hadn't considered. So assessing the sites where there are constraints beyond the expertise of a community group to overcome, such as planting in hard surfaces. And moving on from there, we look at tree species selection, and we've covered this at part today, and I agree with John. The native exotic argument should be dead in the water now. We are not going to achieve the diversity in our urban environments just using native species. It can't be done. But assessing and selecting tree size, selecting the species, assessing which species were suitable for the planting areas, and in most important, liaising with householders, liaising with landowners, liaising with local. What do they want? What are their preferences? And then we move on, buying the trees. So identifying the nurseries. What is a quality tree? Sizes of tree available. Clearly, being able to articulate to the nursery what it is you want. Arranging definite delivery dates, etc. And buying and storage of the other materials. Could somebody turn themselves off? Thank you. Buying and storage of other materials necessary at planting, such as stakes, ties, and mulch. Planting organisation, and this is incredibly sort of complex. Have you got enough volunteers on site at the time to carry out the planting? Can you schedule the numbers of trees to be planted and relate that to the number of volunteers you have? What's the age range and skill level of the volunteers who are going to be available planting? Have you got the transport there to move trees from their storage site to the planting site? And what equipment might be necessary? Step 5, and this would, I've just left this one, the method. But the method for whips and transplants and seedlings is significantly different from large trees. We have to have an understanding of that, and that needs to be translated through to the community groups and maintenance. And it's been referred to several times as well. How many times are we planting numbers of trees and then forgetting about the outcomes? How many of those numbers, which is a very virtual virtuous way of self-promotion. We have planted X million trees, but rarely is the question answered, how many of those trees actually survive, and how many of those trees are likely to go on to complete their full genetic potential. So following samples taken from an instruction guide prepared by the community. It was for a training session I did, and I was completely unaware that they were actually taking photographs. This gentleman here you can see with the spades, which are insulated spades, which was, I thought, a really nice touch. But here's an example of what they produce. It's a stage by stage description of how to plant a bare root tree in a grass verge. There are several other photographs in this series. They provided the text themselves, they prepared the document, and they actually then issued it to all members of their volunteer group. This was an avenue of cherries planted all in one go, and the last time I saw them, the cherries were all thriving very well. And there is now one woman down that road that comes out and makes a donation every year for further tree planting within the community. So a quick word about consultation. And here you'll see there's pictures of trees. So this is the fruit of a thing called Ceiba pedandra. It's the kapok tree, and it was shown in Portugal. And Esme's appeared. Okay. Here's the critical point. It is suggested by me on the consultations I've attended, only include those opinion who is supportive of the consultation subject, those in authority with a vested interest, and those who have a particular single issue to pursue. And now ask the question, how many disenfranchised groups across Europe whose priorities lie elsewhere other than the development of the urban forest? And that's been referred to today. You have to engage with the people who are not really interested in trees, who have other priorities, who have other things that they want to debate and discuss. Here's some guidelines, and I'll leave this because what I would ask you to do is actually look and see how many of the consultations you might be involved in meet this model in terms of what can be achieved and be done. And just to finish off, and there's those folks that really just don't like trees at all, and people like this. I like trees outside my house. It's a nightmare. It's giving off bacteria and viruses. I like trees, but it drops acorns on my car. I like trees, but the leaves are the problem. It's those folks we have to communicate with. And I hate the word educate. We shan't. Educate implies a hierarchy. And I think we need to be talking with them and understanding their perspective on the trees that we want to plant. So that's me finished. And just that's a picture of the three principal systems of nursery production in this country: bare root trees on the left, root ball trees in the centre, and a container grown tree on the right. So that's it. And Esme's giving me daggers now because I've gone over a minute, but that's me done. So I'll come out of here. I'll stop sharing and answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Keith. That was absolutely brilliant. You touched on so many aspects that we haven't managed to cover in some of the other presentations, and also lots of themes. So thank you. Really, really interesting. The chat was going crazy while you were speaking. So let me just pull out a couple of questions. So one interesting one was about vandalism. So if you do manage to get the right trees in the right places with the community groups, with all the advice that you've been talking about, and the planting event goes ahead and it's successful, what's the best way to deal with vandalism of the newly planted trees if that happens?
In my experience, engagement with the community and the people who live and work near the trees, but even more importantly, after you've planted them, maintain them. If you allow grass to grow up around the base of the tree looks uncared for. If you leave the cage around the tree long after it's actually served its purpose. If you, yeah, I think you have to demonstrate aftercare. You have to show that somebody considers the tree important and valuable. Once it starts to become neglected, it seems to be a point where, okay, if nobody cares about it, then it can be prone to vandalism. And what I've found over the years, one of the most effective is using those watering bags. Not everybody likes them. Not everybody is prepared to buy into that, but they actually give a sense of ownership and a sense of summer care. So,
great answer. And Catherine,
and one of the most innovative solutions that I come across, and many of you would have heard it before, Rupert Bentley Walls, when he was at the London Borough of Hackney, gave residents a watering can that had the London Borough of Hackney written on the side. So Rupert then actually, just by the provision of a watering can, implied ownership, which the residents actually bought into, because then they had a declared ownership in the trees.
That's a lovely idea. And Catherine's also just chipped in on the chat to say that involving children really helps protect against vandalism or anything bad happening. Thank you, Keith. Really, really great answers. There's another interesting question here. Any good examples of where councils have stood back a little to let community groups plant street trees without putting obstacles in the way that vastly reduce the opportunities to plant trees?
Yeah, Lewis and East Sussex. They've been very good. They've also adopted a similar process, moving down into Seaford and surrounding areas, so that there's has been the emergence of community groups in those areas over the last 2 to 3 years who are at very, very differing levels of sophistication and progress, but they are actually there. And yeah, Lewes District Council have been supportive in my experience. East Sussex County Council have been supportive in my experience. But can I say, so much in Lewes depends on Audrey and her approach to the council, in that she does not look upon the council as an adversary. She looks at the council as an ally. What happens then is the tree officer, the resistance of the tree officer, which is quite natural, is overcome, and then there's a collaboration between the two. And I've seen that. I mean, Ian McDermott up in Birmingham is really good at it, really strong in that communication, that talking to people and bringing people on board. I know Catherine's had lots of experience. Make people allies. Make people your friends. Take them on board. If you go in to do battle, then what you're going to get back is a battle. If you go in to make friends, then what you might get back is friends. And to say, a lot of it is the personality, and stop doing battle with local authorities. Work with them, because they'll be supportive.
Excellent advice, excellent advice. And I think I'm hearing this theme of kind of connect wherever we can, always, is the first protocol. So thank you so much, Keith. I'm gonna open up to our general discussion now. So we've got about 20-ish minutes. So now is a chance for you to ask any question you'd like, ask any of our speakers a question, or kind of comment on anything. So I'll be keeping an eye on the chat, but please feel free to put your hand up as well.
So I better go back and show
Oh, I think you're there we are. So I'll be looking out for people's hands going up, and I'll also be looking at the chat. Any questions?
There was one for Keith asking about good examples of where councils have stood back a little to let community groups plant street trees without putting obstacles in the way, but vastly reduce the opportunities to plant them.
That's the one we just asked, I think, Sue, and Keith was talking about Lewis a bit. No, it's fine. It's good. It's a really good question.
I just wondered if anybody else on the call knew of any other examples, because I get a lot of inquiries saying, we'd love to plant some trees in our soft verge, but Cadence say we can't go within so many meters of their gas pipe, and oh dear, we've been pushed back. You know, how do we get positive things out for people?
I'll open that up to speakers then, and then you.
Ollie has his hand up. Esme.
Yeah, does anyone want to? Ollie, you go for it.
Well, no, do you want me to answer the council question quickly or give some thoughts on it?
Sure, go for it, John.
Yeah, it's just really, it's kind of a bit of a word in defence of councils maybe as well, because sometimes the obstacles that councils are putting in the way of people wanting to plant trees are perfectly reasonable obstacles. And having been a tree officer for quite a few years, often you'll have people saying, oh, wouldn't it look wonderful with trees all down this street? And the tree officer quite regularly wants to plant trees down the street. It's one of the main reasons they became a tree officer, is probably because they like trees even more than the person who's asking them to plant them. But it's not always possible with things like utilities and costs and sight lines and various other things. So I just think sometimes councils do put obstacles in the way unnecessarily, and it's really important that we sort of challenge that where it is. But it's also very important not to tar all local authorities with the same brush, because some really do want to plant trees, but it's just incredibly difficult to do so. So just a little plea for the tree officers who are doing a very difficult job and don't necessarily need to be on the end of any more criticism.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to come in and support that statement for John, because I work with a lot of tree officers over time. Most tree officers are very committed, want to plant trees and want to maintain and look after the trees they got. I think what we, if you like, as the public, have to appreciate the many, many tasks they're having to undertake and the pressures they're under. And we have to make allowance for that. And I also find that most tree officers, if the approach is made in a non-confrontational way, most tree officers will be responsive and helpful.
Thank you, Keith. And I think Catherine popped her hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add to that in that, you know, I suppose that's why I make the case for, you know, those connections. So the tree officers, every tree officer I know is absolutely strung out with work. You know, trees are a bigger issue. They're very emotive. On one hand, they've got people that are saying no, trees should never be cut down. On the other hand, you've got all the I like trees, but people, it's like pulled in a million different directions. If, you know, where there's the case for someone whose job it is to join up those conversations, to kind of do the legwork, you know, with the tree officer and, you know, with the you know, whoever's managing the land, then it kind of smooths everything over. And I think it would just, you know, it just helps communities get what they want, but also, you know, smooths the way a little bit for councils trying to express what they're trying to do, you know, in a clear way. Because I think most people in local authorities do want the best. Well, of course they do. That they're public servants. You know, obviously with councillors, it's you know, maybe a different issue than there's politics. But generally, as a rule, you know, people trying to do things in other people's best interest. But it's that keeping that communication link up that's so important.
Thank you, Catherine. All great answers. So Ollie, I'll come to you now. Thanks for being so patient for your question.
Oh, that's all right. I mean, to be honest, I don't really have much to build on what everyone else was saying. It was more a shout out for Lewisham, who do a very similar thing, where they've got a very open conversation with residents via the charity that I work for. And the big thing does seem to be being able to sort of do that bridging that Catherine was talking about, that like a community forester does, where we know a little bit about what, you know, what the kind of technical restraints will be. So we sort of are bringing some of that knowledge already into it. So yeah, I didn't really add much to what everyone else says.
Thank you, Ollie. That's brilliant. Laura, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, so question for Audrey. I'm part of the community forestry team in Sheffield, and we work with, hi Catherine, and we work with lots of friends of groups and community groups, but it tends to be quite a top-down process. They might say to us, we'd like trees in our local park, but then it comes to us to say what can go there, where they can go, and kind of do all of the things it sounds like Audrey and her group are doing. So when none of the friends or groups that I can think of are at a stage where they have the knowledge or the skills or probably the time and people to take on more and take on more ownership. So it'd be really good if Audrey's got a, I don't know, a loose list of what kind of experts do you want in the group? What kind of time commitment do people give? Do you kind of treat it almost like a job? Do you make that kind of quite serious commitment, or is it quite casual? Lots of things. I'm asking everything, really. Sorry.
It is a bit like a job in that it is a sort of ongoing commitment rather than a full-time commitment, because you don't know when, you know, a big branch is going to snap off a tree and you need to deal with it before somebody complains and it gives trees a bad name somehow. As I said, the people on our trees committee include people like Keith, who is very knowledgeable, as you probably already know, the Lewis District Council officer, a forestry person, somebody who does a lot of contracting work and has his own woodland, but he does a lot of contracting work for local councils, so he knows all the problems and pitfalls and where trees need attention as well. And you said about it being top down, that a lot of people, like residents associations, approach us and ask for trees, you know, around their neighborhood, and they might make suggestions, but they don't want to be very involved in doing it, although they will help look after them once they're planted. The other element of it is that on the East Sussex highways now, you have to have the NRSWA qualifications to be able to plant in the highway. So that does restrict the number of people who can be involved on those pieces of land. But it's what everyone else has talked about, really involving people, like on the Lewis District Council land. It tends to be a lot of it places where there aren't any services. So you can involve groups like the Beavers and their parents, the Tree Toddlers group and their parents. And I don't know if that answers your question in any way.
Yes, thank you. I think we have enthusiastic friends groups, and I think it would perhaps our next step as council, the council team working with them, would be to perhaps put them in touch with. It sounds like you've got a great bank of experts, so perhaps that's where we need to go next.
Well, or get somebody like Keith, who lives in your area, to give them training like he was talking about, so that then they can be independent.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thanks, Audrey. Thanks, Laura. Dan, would you like to ask your question?
Hey, yeah, thanks for everyone's presentations. I'm after some advice on street tree pit planting, so planting in the pit beneath a street tree. We find there's like a lot of enthusiasm. It's kind of clear through guerrilla gardening, basically, that people like doing this. And it definitely increases a sort of sense of ownership or connection to trees in the public realm. But we're also under pressure from the highways department to keep our streets and footways kind of hazard free. So I'm just wondering if anyone's found any sort of happy mediums, or whether it's just like mulch and bulbs are the answer. Yeah, any advice would be appreciated. Cheers.
Thank you, Dan. Great question. Anyone want to tackle that one? Keith smiling. Oh, Keith, you're on mute.
Yeah, I suppose I better. Yeah, well, Dan, keep it simple. Am I muted still? Yeah, keep it simple, Dan. Don't do more than is necessary. Look at the site you're working on and choose an appropriate method for the site you're working on. Consider the nursery production method, because bare root trees are easier to plant than either containers or root balls. Consider the retention of the mulch ring around the base of the tree. because again, we find that it goes back to that care scenario. If the mulching is maintained, the mower stays away from it, but it also demonstrates care. Other than that, sort of some of the mythologies about tree pit planting, dig down to a metre and put the grass you've taken off the top at the bottom of the pit, churn it up and then plant in that. It's completely unnecessary. And if you're working with volunteers, why get them to dig a metre by a metre tree pit if a smaller pit is all that's necessary to successfully plant the tree? In Lewis, what we would tend to do now is we tend to mark out the tree root system, go perhaps 10 centimetres either side of that. That's our tree planting hole. The pit area, we've taken out a metre of grass, which is our mulch area, but we don't try to dig out our entire metre. Leave the bottom of the pit undisturbed. Water directly after planting. Take away stakes and other ties as soon as they've fulfilled their use. It's very difficult to answer this in 2 minutes. If you want to drop me an email, Keith@Bartram-Trees, I'll happily try and give you a fuller answer.
Thanks, Keith. Naomi, sorry, go on, John.
Esme, can you let, I think John wants to come in with a follow-up point, so it might be useful if you let John actually come in and make his point.
I will. And Naomi, I can see your hand is up, so I'll come to you in a second. Is that okay? John, over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the sort of subject of guerrilla planting or planting plants in tree pits as well, which is something that I dealt with when I was working in London quite a bit. And obviously, it's people want to make them look nicer, and that's great. But what we found was that just getting well-meaning people to start digging up tree pits and putting plants in there, which then act as competition for the tree you've just planted, isn't always necessarily helpful. So it's very much just trying to judge it on a case-by-case basis. And I saw some terrible things, people thinking, oh, we won't dig it down into the roots, so we'll build up timber around the outside and then we'll fill that with soil and plant in that. And of course, that's then changing the ground levels around the base of the tree as well. So personally, I'm not a massive fan of it. And I've seen quite a few examples where you end up with a dead sapling and really healthy shrubs growing around it where people have planted stuff in, and that's not really what anyone wants. So again, maybe a little bit of give and take between the local authority, who there is an instinct to say no, keep it completely clear, we don't want anything, and maybe some members of the public who want it to be really, really green, maybe saying, well, okay, we're not going to do anything for the first 2 years, but then we may consider doing some limited planting, for example. Just again, about communication and collaboration would be my thoughts on that.
And if I might add to that, one of the things that I've been working with here in Switzerland is using pollinator habitat as an approach for what we might do in the planting pit, because right now it's worse than a desert. It's completely compacted, it's covered with chausirung, it's got little gravel stones instead of an organic layer. So the tree has nothing that in its surroundings that is actually conducive to a soil organism. And so the approach that I've taken here is perennials, not shrubs, and perennials that might be part of the tree's association and where it comes from. And in addition, plant using seeds, not plants, which then you eliminate this digging. And the last part of it is somebody who has experience being part of the actual happening, so that there's guidance, it's done correctly, and citizens feel they've accomplished something and they want to protect it because it serves two purposes. It's an organic layer and it's pollinator habitat. And I would imagine that the UK is suffering from the same pollinator loss that we are here in Switzerland. So that's my contribution to the pit scenario.
Thank you, Naomi. Really helpful. Dan, was that useful?
Yeah, that's
But I
great.
al-
Thanks. Cheers. And thanks for whoever it was that shared Keith's email as well. Thank you for that.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Lots of great questions in the chat, but Zora, I'll come to you because you've got your hand up.
Hi. I support community groups to improve biodiversity in urban areas, and I want them to learn about different approaches, and especially ones that community groups can take. And that's how I came across the Tiny Forests project. And we also worked briefly with an expert in the Dundee Botanic Gardens who advocates that the Miyawaki method. And I was just wondering what the presenters think of it, as it sounds to be a very different approach than what everyone was talking about.
May I?
Thanks so much, Zora. I'll just go to the panel quickly, then I'll come back to you, Naomi. Anyone from the panel wants to talk about tiny forest?
I'll start with being controversial. I think they're I think they're fraudulent and they don't actually achieve what and they're often divorced from the landscape around them. So you have no connectivity with the landscape around them. I don't like them. So there you are. I won't go any deeper, but I think that makes my position clear.
Thank you, Keith.
I'll just sorry, Catherine. I was just going to chip in quickly and say I agree with Keith. I think it's a complete gimmick. I'm sure it's nice in some places and there's some nice community engagement, but let's not pretend that this is a sustainable or good way of planting trees in the way that we want to be doing it in urban areas. There may be a place for them, but it's not some kind of standard magical solution. So I agree with Keith.
Catherine.
Yeah, but just on that, tiny forest was really interesting because when I was working in community forestry with over COVID, and Earthwatch got in touch about all of this. But the thing is, if they want to increase biodiversity, then it's surely over COVID, all these trees popping up. It's the urban forest. It's a forest, the city, and certainly in Sheffield, 20% trees popping up everywhere. Don't mow it, it becomes trees. Surely, if we're looking at biodiversity, maybe managing areas for trees in cities, so mulching the trees, kind of working with nature to nudge it in that way is better, because then you've got the transition between kind of grasslands to potentially to scrub and to trees, than like ploughing up all of the soil, turning it all over, and then putting in as many trees as possible. However, what tiny forests do, what it does, is allow you to get in loads of trees. And when you've got when your politician has promised 1 million trees in the city, then you think, well, that's the solution, isn't it? That's how you get these things. And essentially they're a hedge, like it's a hedge, only not in a line. So plant hedges, that's what I do.
But isn't it a square hedge with lots of tree officers have been really expressing concern about antisocial behavior. They're busy clearing scrub, and then all these tiny forests appear. And sorry, Naomi, I jumped in ahead of you.
Naomi, go for it.
So there's a few important things to remember here. Number one, it is afforestation. It is not regeneration, nor is it reforestation. That's the first thing. The second thing is it is a trendy greenwashing strategy that is geared to making money for someone. There's huge overcharges in the costs of these seedlings and saplings. There is no thought process whatsoever as to what gets put with what, which, if you understand forest ecosystem and forest ecology, there is a total logic to the way every forest has evolved. And the other thing, the plantings are so dense that the research has shown that up to 70% has to be removed in order for the remaining 30% to actually grow into trees. Now, trees deserve more respect than sticking stems in the ground for the sole purpose of some instant pudding, and then they're going to be cut down. I think those of us who care about trees should do better than that. There's many other strategies. There's cluster plantings where you can group trees that are a size that's not fragile. Then they've got open soil. There's lots of strategies for engaging citizens in tree planting, which we've heard today. There is no excuse for doing a tiny forest because it doesn't bring what it promises. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Naomi. I can see Catherine's taken her off mute. Catherine, do you want to say anything or no? Oh, no. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We have got 2 minutes left, so I'm sorry to wrap up now, but I do want to finish on time. There are a couple of questions that we didn't get through in the chat. Thank you so much, and thank you all for answering each other's questions as we've gone through. It's a wonderful community there in the chat. Just before I hand back over to Sue, please can I have a virtual round of applause for all of our brilliant speakers and all the other contributions today. You were absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Big thank you to Sue, Emma, and Dee, and everyone else at TDAG for putting this together. What a gem of a kind of couple of hours. There's so much learning and enthusiasm and community, so thank you. Sue, back over to you.
Thanks, Esme, and of course a big thank you to you, brilliantly chaired and all on time. So I'm just going to very quickly say that the recording, the presentations and analysis of the chat, once I manage to do it in the next day or so, will all be on the TDAG website under past events, so look there. The next seminar is on the 24th of September, same time, 2 till 4 BST. And we're going to attempt to look at local authority investment in trees and green infrastructure for multiple benefits, i.e. how can we help local authorities have the funding they need? It's pertinent because a recent survey by the Local Government Association found that 48% of local authorities say they plan to defund to varying degrees the parks and other green spaces within their areas. So, and yet we know that those parks and green spaces put about 6.6 billion into benefits to the communities. So there's a misfit there, which we need to consider. So I think the details of this seminar will be on the website shortly. I think Dee's already opened the registration. So just go there under TDAG events. And that is about it from me. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you everybody for all our presenters, to Esme and everybody, and it's now time for tea.
Hi everyone.